The message came just after sunrise, the light still pale and weak against my curtains. My phone buzzed once, and when I pressed play, Clarice's voice slashed through the quiet. "You are a useless woman." There was no stammer, no hesitation, only a cold edge I'd heard before in whispers, but never so naked. A click, and then the screen told me she had blocked me. Not even the courtesy of follow-up words, just silence sealed like a coffin. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hand still resting on the phone. Once years ago, words like that might have broken me. But now, after so many small humiliations, they only hollowed me out further. I did not cry. Tears felt undeserved. Instead, I exhaled slow and deliberate, like extinguishing a candle no longer worth its flame. The air in the room seemed too thin. I reached for my robe, tied it loosely around my waist, and walked to the study. The carpet carried the faint scent of lavender sachets I'd kept since Richard died, small reminders of steadiness. I bent down, pulled back the rug, and revealed the old safe embedded in the floor. My fingers had memorized the combination years ago. The lock clicked open with a reluctant sigh. Inside lay the things that had outlasted grief, neatly stacked folders, each marked in my handwriting. Beacon Crest Transfer of Title 2019, BMW Portfolio 2020, Living Trust Revised. They had been my quiet companions, waiting in shadow while I tried to keep peace. But tucked just above the documents, folded in an envelope browned with time, was something more fragile. Richard's letter. His handwriting was precise, every line pressed into the page with his familiar fountain pen. Evelina, never surrender ownership. Protect what we built. Our work was never meant to be given away to anyone who hasn't earned it. If the day comes when kindness is mistaken for weakness, let these papers speak for you. I trust you more than anyone alive. I read the lines twice, tracing each word with the tip of my finger as if to feel his presence. He had known even then. Perhaps he had seen in Clarice's eyes what Damon chose not to see. Perhaps he had simply understood human nature better than I wanted to admit. The letter did not make me sad, it steadied me. Anger had flared when I first heard her voice note, but Richard's words cooled it into something sharper, something I could hold without trembling. A different kind of resolve spread through me, quiet but certain. I slid the letter back into its envelope and placed it atop the trust binder. For years, I had allowed Clarice's sighs, her dismissive laughter, her polished excuses to chip at my dignity. I told myself it was for Damon's sake, for the children, for peace. But the truth was, I had been afraid of loneliness, afraid that standing up to her would mean standing alone. Now, with her voice still echoing in my head, I felt the weight of solitude lift. It wasn't loneliness. It was clarity. I closed the safe, spun the dial, and replaced the rug. Then I straightened, squared my shoulders, and looked around the study as if seeing it for the first time. This was not just a room filled with old papers. It was an armory. And I was done keeping the weapons locked away. The phone still lay in my hand, black screen reflecting my face back at me. I scrolled through the contact list until I found the name I hadn't called in over a year. Dean Harper. My thumb hovered, but only for a breath. When cruelty confirms what you've always feared, hesitation has no place. I pressed the call button and listened to the ring, already knowing what I would say when he answered. By the time I reached Dean Harper's office, the morning had sharpened into noon, the sunlight too bright for how hollow I felt inside. His building was the same as always, brick shoulders against a narrow downtown street, its windows darkened by years of polished wood trim. I had walked through these doors countless times in my working life, once to guide clients, then later to adjust my own estate. Today, though, I walked in not as a mother or widow, but as a client prepared to draw a final line. Dean rose when I entered, his hair whiter than I remembered, but his posture still steady, his desk arranged with surgical precision. He gestured for me to sit. "Evelina," he said gently. "It's been a while. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I need to initiate an immediate recall on 2 assets, Beacon Crest property and the BMW. Both are still held under my living trust." He blinked once, perhaps weighing the gravity beneath my calm tone. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. Let's go through the documents." I pulled the folders from my bag. My hands didn't tremble as I slid them across the polished oak. Dean adjusted his glasses, scanning each page with the practiced eye of a man who had spent decades threading loopholes shut. "Everything here is airtight," he said after a few minutes. "The recall clause is clear. You have sole authority to liquidate in cases of misuse or coercion. Are you certain this is the path you want?" I met his gaze. "I'm not doing this in anger. She's already told me what she thinks of me. She made her intentions clear. I'm protecting what's left." Dean exhaled, then reached for his pen. "Then we'll move quickly." Within an hour, the paperwork was signed, notarized, and filed. His assistant sent notice to the county recorder for the property and another to the DMV regarding the vehicle. Dean kept his tone steady, professional, but I caught the faintest trace of respect in the way he said, "You documented everything." I learned long ago I murmured evidence outlasts excuses. By 3 o'clock, Claire, the realtor I had trusted once before, called my phone directly. "Evelina," she said warmly. "Dean filled me in. We'll handle this quietly. I can have the Beacon Crest listing staged with a coming soon banner within hours." Her efficiency steadied me. I gave my approval, picturing my hydrangeas framed in photographs, the very flowers Clarice had once posed beside for her social media. They would now serve as silent witnesses to a different narrative. Not long after, a dealership emailed Dean's office with an offer on the BMW above market value, a quick cash purchase. Clarice had paraded that car as though it were her crown jewel. She never realized it had never truly been hers. By the time the sun lowered behind the downtown buildings, every lever had been set in motion. The house she called her own was now a line item soon to be stripped of her keys and her claim. The car she flaunted was already spoken for. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, a strange grief pressed against me as though I were burying something that had once been alive. Families are not meant to fracture in offices and signatures. Yet there I was, watching the bonds dissolve in ink, knowing it had to be done. When I left Dean's office, the sky had shifted into the mellow glow of early evening. I walked past the flower shop at the corner, its windows filled with roses. Their fragrance drifted into the air, faint and bittersweet. I paused a moment, inhaled, and then moved on. By the time I reached my car, I realized that what I felt was not just grief. It was relief, cold and clean. The kind that comes when you finally stop waiting for someone to change and start changing the locks yourself. I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and thought of the day Clarice had first appeared on my porch, suitcase in hand, promising she would only need 1 month. 6 months earlier, the storm had carried her to my door. I remember the sound of rain slapping against the porch roof, the sharp scent of wet earth rising through the air. When I opened the door, Clarice stood there in yoga pants and a fitted jacket, her hair plastered damp against her cheek, a pink suitcase dragging behind her like an unwanted child. In one hand, she balanced a latte cup as if it were part of her wardrobe, not a drink. "Hi, Mom," she said, using the word with an ease that didn't fit the moment. Total disaster. My lease fell through at the last minute. Just for a month, I swear. Her tone was quick rehearsed, as if excuses were an accessory she carried alongside her luggage. Behind her, Damon's car idled his face, visible only in the glow of the dashboard. He didn't step out. I hesitated, the cold air rushing past me, the rain threatening to push her inside, whether I agreed or not. 1 month. That was what she promised. I nodded, stepping aside like I always did, and the house swallowed her up. That first week, I cooked too much out of nervousness. The refrigerator filled with soups and casseroles she never touched. Instead, she ordered meal kits charged to my card without asking, boxes stacked on the porch like offerings to a life I didn't recognize. When I asked, she laughed lightly. "Oh, I'll sort it out later. It's just easier for now." Damon came by the next weekend with the children. He kissed my cheek, glanced at the stocked kitchen, and smiled faintly. "She just needs time to get back on her feet, Mom. It's temporary." His words carried the weight of a son pleading for patience, not certainty. I swallowed my doubts and nodded again. Temporary. But weeks stretched like taffy, thin and sticky, impossible to pull apart. Clarice brought in more of her things designer shoes in neat rows by the entryway boxes of cosmetics lining the bathroom counter, a ring light in the living room corner. She began referring to the guest bedroom as our space, never once acknowledging it was borrowed. When the children visited, they trailed behind her balancing tablets and headphones, dropping backpacks in my hallway. I tried to welcome the noise, the life, but something inside me shifted. This was no longer my house filled with family. It was a stage where she performed a role of control. One evening, I mentioned the timeline, reminding her the month had nearly passed. She looked up from her phone. Expression light, almost amused. "Oh, Mom, don't be dramatic. I just meant I needed a little while. It's not like I'm taking over." But she already had. My grocery bill doubled. Packages arrived daily, some with my name typed neatly on the label, but none ordered by me. She said it was a mistake, a glitch, but the receipts in the trash told a different story. Spa appointments, luxury shoes retreats she called networking. The month ended, and nothing changed. She began calling it staying for a bit. Damon avoided the subject altogether, his silence a kind of complicity. I told myself it was easier not to fight, easier to let her occupy space until she found her footing. But inside, I knew she wasn't searching for footing. She was laying claim. It was raining again the day I realized she had no intention of leaving. She breezed through the front door without knocking, latte in hand, the suitcase replaced by shopping bags. She dropped them on my couch and sighed dramatically. This weather, it ruins everything. I looked at the damp footprints trailing across my hardwood floor, at the piles of belongings that had taken root in corners once empty, and I felt the first crack of something inside me hardening. She had said 1 month. It was already 3. The rain beat harder against the windows as if echoing the truth I hadn't wanted to hear. It began with the curtains. One afternoon, I came home from my physical therapy appointment to find the lace drapes in the living room gone, replaced with long beige panels that reached the floor. Clarice was standing on a step stool, smoothing them out, phone angled in one hand. "Better light for photos," she said, without looking at me. "Your curtains were too fussy." Before I could answer, she tapped record and launched into a video. So today, I'm showing you how natural light can completely change the mood of a room. Look at these clean lines. She panned across my rug, my sofa. The family photos on the mantel, except the photos were no longer mine. She had swapped them out for sleek digital frames, cycling through images of Damon, the kids, and Clarice herself, smiling on beaches at brunches in dresses I'd never seen before. That was the beginning of the house tour era. Every week, sometimes twice a week, she posted new content. A video of her kitchen with its vintage oak cabinets, a reel of her cozy reading nook where my chair once sat. She didn't tag me or mention me. She tagged brands, stores, influencers. At first I told myself it was harmless, another one of her passing hobbies. But it wasn't passing. The boxes piled higher. Accent pillows, new dining chairs, a trendy coffee machine I didn't know how to use. She narrated it all for her followers. My style is all about blending modern with traditional. This house is such a canvas for me. Her followers commented with hearts and praise. Dream home. Such taste. Love your design. I read the words over her shoulder once, and my stomach tightened. She wasn't borrowing anymore. She was claiming. I tried to hold my ground in small ways. I kept my hydrangeas blooming by the front walk, tended them with extra care. But even those showed up on her feed. My garden goals, she called them. Captioning a picture of herself holding the watering can I had used for 20 years. I began to feel like a visitor in my own home, someone tolerated, but not featured. She filled the refrigerator with her sparkling waters, and imported cheeses rearranged my pantry to fit her meal kits. My coffee tins disappeared, replaced by her frothers and syrups. If I moved anything back, it was changed again within hours, as if my choices had become suggestions she could erase. One evening, carrying laundry down the hallway, I paused outside the guest bedroom. No, her bedroom now. Laughter bubbled through the door, her voice sharp and careless. Once the deed flips, she's off to senior condos. Can you imagine she'll thank me later when she's in a place that actually suits her? Her friend laughed in reply, muffled but eager. Clarice's voice rose again. I've practically made this house mine already. Damon doesn't even realize how easy it's going to be. She's old, she won't fight it. I stood frozen laundry heavy in my arms, the words settling like stones. Not a maybe, not a plan whispered in insecurity. It was fact to her. My exile already decided. I didn't step inside to confront her. I didn't drop the laundry or shout. Instead, I carried the basket back to my room, closed the door, and sat on the bed with the trust documents spread before me. The voice note she would send months later hadn't been born in a single moment of cruelty. It was planted here in these careless laughs, watered by entitlement, until it grew sharp enough to pierce. I smoothed the red tab of the Beacon Crest folder and pressed it flat beneath my palm. Clarice thought she had time, thought she had me cornered. She didn't realize I had already built walls she could not see. That night, I didn't sleep. The words I'd overheard her casual certainty about sending me off to a condo circled my thoughts like scavenger birds. They stripped away the last of my denial, leaving only bone and truth. I lay in bed, with my heart steady, not racing, as if my body finally understood what my mind had refused. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a campaign. At dawn, I rose and went to my study. I pulled open the locked drawer where I kept more than memories. Inside were file folders, empty binders, and the quiet tools of my old profession. Most women my age filled drawers with recipes or quilting fabric. I had always filled mine with paper that could stand up in court. I began with the simplest pile: grocery receipts. I had kept them out of habit, not foresight, tucked into a small wooden box. Sorting them now, I drew 3 stacks. One for items I'd bought for myself, breadfruit, modest cuts of meat. Another for what Clarice had ordered on my card, detox teas, imported cheeses, meal kits stacked 3 boxes high each week. The third for the charges she never even asked about, her signatures, bold as if she were the one earning the pension. Next came the utilities. Every bill was in my name, every payment from my account. I highlighted each one with a yellow marker month after month of evidence that no tenant, no co-owner had ever shared the burden. Clarice had pitched in nothing but her laughter when the lights stayed on. Insurance records followed. Car insurance for the BMW always paid by me. She had called it temporary when she first borrowed it a bridge until her financing came through. That bridge had turned into a year-long highway. I circled the premium amounts in red ink the same way I once prepared case exhibits for court. By midday, my dining table had transformed into a war map. 3 large binders lay open, each labeled in block letters: fraud, misuse, abandonment. Into them went every receipt, every bill, every careless scrap of proof she had left behind. She thought herself clever, erasing text messages and tossing bags in the trash. She forgot that paper has a memory longer than resentment. As I worked, I felt something stir inside me I hadn't felt in years. A current of sharp focus, the kind I used to summon when drafting trusts designed to withstand lawsuits and divorces. I had spent 30 years protecting other families from their greedy relatives. I knew every loophole, every clause. I had sewn the nets, reinforced the knots, and now, ironically, I was the one who needed saving from greed inside my own walls. Clarice believed my age made me soft, that my silver hair and slower gait meant my mind had dulled. She mistook politeness for surrender, quiet for incapacity. She didn't know that every sigh she dismissed, every eye roll she tossed my way, only sharpened the blade I was forging out of documents and signatures. By late afternoon, the study smelled of ink and paper, my highlighters worn at the tips. I stacked the binders neatly, one atop the other, and rested my hand on them. They were heavier than they looked, weighted not just with paper, but with my dignity piece by piece reclaimed. I sat back and thought of Richard's letter, the one tucked safely above the trust documents. He had told me to protect what we built. For months I had let Clarice rearrange the furniture, silence my voice, and parade my home as hers. Tonight, though, I realized I hadn't broken his promise. I had only been waiting for the right time to act. The trap was ready. All that remained was for her to walk into it. And soon, she would. When I slid the binders across Dean's desk, he didn't rush to open them. He simply rested his palm on the stack as though weighing them, as if he could feel the gravity through the covers. Then he adjusted his glasses and began to read. His office smelled faintly of leather and dust, the same as it had a decade ago when I first asked him to draft the living trust. Back then, I thought I was being cautious. Now, watching his pen move over the papers, I realized I had been prophetic. Dean flipped through receipts, highlighted statements, notarized amendments. Not once did his brow furrow in doubt. Finally, he closed the binder and looked up. "It's airtight, Evelina. You prepared this yourself." "Yes," I answered. After Richard died, I couldn't bear the thought of our home getting tangled in probate. I wanted control to be clear, and I added full recall authority in case anyone tried to misuse what wasn't theirs. He tapped the affidavit resting between us. "Then all that remains is your signature." The pen felt heavier than it should have. My name, written countless times in routine transactions, now carried the weight of decades of love given and taken for granted. I pressed the tip to the page and signed slowly each stroke, deliberate. My hand didn't shake. When I finished, I set the pen down and whispered, "This is not revenge. It's restoration." Dean gave a quiet nod, not of approval, but of recognition. He'd seen enough families torn apart in his career to know the difference. "I'll file this today. You'll start seeing movement within hours?" He was right. By evening, Claire the realtor called. "Evelina, I have a photographer ready. We'll keep it discreet, but the Beacon Crest property will go live with a coming soon banner tomorrow." Her voice carried the same efficiency I remembered from years back, steady and without judgment. I agreed, imagining the glossy images of my hydrangeas and oak cabinets now carrying a different message, not possession, but release. The next morning, a dealership representative arrived to assess the BMW. He didn't know the story, didn't ask why a vehicle so meticulously kept was being sold. He only saw the clean leather seats, the mileage well below average, the ownership title, in my name alone. By afternoon, an email from Dean confirmed it, an above-market offer pending only my signature. Clarice had once boasted that the car was her second skin, the thing that announced her worth before she ever spoke. Now, it was nothing more than a figure on a sales sheet already spoken for. I walked through the Beacon Crest kitchen that evening with a new awareness. The space still looked the same. Counters, wiped dishes stacked, the hum of the refrigerator steady, but it no longer belonged to the fantasy Clarice had woven online. The walls were mine again, even if only briefly, before the sale closed. Every corner I touched felt less like a surrender and more like a reclamation. When the house went live on the realtor's site the next day, I didn't tell anyone. No posts, no calls, no explanations. The photograph of the front porch, with its glossy coming soon ribbon, was enough. As quiet, factual, irreversible. I stood at the window that night, the glow of the listing open on my laptop, and felt the silence settle around me. It wasn't empty silence, not anymore. It was space I had carved out of deceit, a silence that belonged to me. The next week, when Clarice returned earlier than planned, she would find the silence waiting for her. It was late afternoon when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I had been pruning the rosemary on the patio, the scissors soft against the stems, when the sound reached me. Clarice was back 2 days earlier than she had said, a borrowed sedan pulling into the drive where her BMW once sat. I didn't move, just kept clipping the sprigs, inhaling their sharp scent, as if I were bracing for the storm. The car door slammed, and her heels struck the stones with quick, angry beats. She froze at the foot of the driveway, eyes darting to the empty space where her prized vehicle should have been. For a moment, she simply stared, her phone still in her hand. Then she turned to the front door. The smart lock blinked red. She pressed again, harder this time. Red again. The porch light flickered automatically as the evening settled, and I saw her shoulders stiffen. Through the kitchen window, I watched her mouth shape the words. I couldn't hear curses and disbelief woven into one. She jabbed her phone screen, and seconds later, mine buzzed on the counter. "You conniving old hag," her voice spat when I picked up. "What have you done?" I steadied my breath, lifting the teacup I had poured earlier. The steam curled into my face, grounding me. "I executed a trust agreement," I said evenly. "The one I created, the one you signed. You are no longer a resident. The car and the home are no longer under your control." "You can't do this," she shouted. "I'll sue. I'll take you to court. Everyone's going to know what you did." "Dean Harper will respond to any legal threats," I replied. "You may direct further communication to his office." And then I ended the call. The phone rang again, once, twice, 3 more times. I didn't answer. My hands didn't shake as they once would have. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the counter, turned off the ringer, and sipped my tea. Outside, Clarice paced in the driveway, her silhouette flaring beneath the security light. She pressed the lock again, slammed her palm against the door, then retreated to the car. Another attempt. Another failure. Finally, the sedan pulled away, gravel spitting under the tires. The silence that followed was so complete, it hummed. I stood in the kitchen. cup still warm in my hand, and let the weight of it sink in. This was the first night in over half a year that the house was truly mine again. I moved slowly through the rooms, touching the edges of furniture, the frames of doors, the banister of the stairs. They were ordinary objects, but tonight they felt restored, each one answering back, "Yes, you belong here." In the guest room, her perfume lingered, faintly cloying and sharp. I opened the window and let the night air sweep in. The sound of crickets rose from the garden, drowning out the echo of her voice. Back in the kitchen, I poured myself a second cup of tea. The ritual steadied me, the clink of the spoon against porcelain, soft and sure. I had feared this moment, feared the confrontation, but it had passed more easily than I imagined. Not because she had accepted it, but because I had. The house was quiet, the locks firm. For the first time in months, I knew that every key on the hook belonged to me alone. And I knew she would not stop here. The following weekend, Damon brought the children. He didn't come inside, only dropped them at the curb with a hurried wave. Izzy and Lucian stood uncertain on the porch, backpacks slung over their shoulders, eyes darting past me toward the driveway as if expecting their mother to appear. "Come in, loves," I said softly. "It's just us today." They slipped inside without a word. Izzy clutched her sketchbook to her chest, Lucian, his small, stuffed fox. Both carried the tight shoulders of children who had heard too much behind closed doors. I set water to boil and pulled down the cocoa tin. As the milk frothed, I glanced at them perched on the couch legs, tucked close eyes flicking to each other as though trying to confirm what they were supposed to feel. When I brought the mugs, the scent of chocolate filled the room. Izzy wrapped both hands around hers, staring into the swirl. "Grandma?" She asked finally, why was Mommy yelling in the driveway? The other day, her voice was careful, not accusing, but afraid. I sat beside her. "Sometimes grown-ups disagree," I said, "and sometimes they get louder than they should. But nothing that happened out there was your fault." Lucian looked up, brow furrowed. "Mommy said you took her car." I rested a hand over his. The car was always mine. I just decided not to share it anymore. Their faces shifted, not with relief, but with the quiet calculation. Children learn too early when caught between parents and grandparents. I would not speak ill of their mother. I had no desire to add to their confusion. So instead, I asked, "Do you want marshmallows in the next cup?" The question broke the tension, and for a while they simply sipped and let themselves be children again. Izzy even opened her sketchbook, showing me a drawing of a castle with tall windows. "That's your house," she said. "I made the flowers extra big." Later, after they'd gone to bed in the guest room, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. Notifications pinged one after another, friends from church and neighbors forwarding me screenshots. Clarice's newest post spread across the screen, glossy photo of the children smiling in last summer's garden. She stole from her own grandchildren. The caption read, "The house, the car, everything meant for their future, gone." The comments rolled beneath it, hearts and sympathies, people who had no idea of the truth. Some asked how a grandmother could be so cruel. Others offered support, promises of prayers. My chest tightened, but I didn't respond. Instead, I took screenshots of every line. Post after post, I cataloged them, saving each into a folder labeled "Post Recall Contact Clarice." It was a strange ritual, harvesting lies like crops, preserving them for later. I did not engage, did not correct. To the outside world, silence might look like surrender. But in the world I was building, silence was proof. When Izzy padded out for water, she found me at the table. "Grandma," she whispered, "are you mad at Mommy?" I looked into her wide eyes, the innocence still unbroken, and shook my head. No, sweetheart. I'm not mad. I'm just careful. She considered that, nodded once, and padded back to bed. I closed the laptop, shut the folder, and let the darkness of the kitchen close around me. The cocoa mug still sat in the sink. Faint rings of chocolate clinging to the rim's reminders of the small sweetness worth protecting. I knew Clarice's campaign had only just begun. By Saturday morning, I had cleared the dining table and stacked it with everything I could find. Bank statements, unopened, envelopes, and the binders already labeled. The children's laughter from the night before still lingered faintly in the walls, but now the house was silent, steady, and mine to work in. I began with the utilities. Every bill carried my name. Gas, water, electricity, all faithfully paid from my checking account. Each one bore dates that lined up perfectly with Clarice's stay. I highlighted the totals page after page, the yellow stripes bright as warning tape. She had never contributed a dime. Next came the subscriptions. On my statements, I found charges for streaming services I had never watched. Netflix, Hulu, even a premium sports package I couldn't have identified if asked. All tucked between my own purchases, like weeds in a garden. I found the home office line buried in my AT&T account. A second number added last spring. Monthly charges quietly withdrawn, labeled under my plan as if I had ordered it myself. I never noticed because the bill was set to autopay. I circled the entries in red ink, each one tightening the case I was building. The Nordstrom card was worse. The envelope had been buried in a stack of circulars, opened but never shown to me. I read the balance twice to be sure, $3,119. Purchases. I would never make luxury cosmetics designer Heels boutique handbags. My name sat at the top of the page, bold and undeniable. She hadn't only spent my money, she had become me on paper. I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly, and steadied my hand before sliding the statement into the fraud binder. There was no room for collapse. Evidence demanded clarity, not tears. By Sunday, I had assembled a folder thick with printouts and annotations. I called Dean and asked him to run a credit check under my Social Security number. He agreed without hesitation. Within an hour, he called back, his voice lower than usual. Evelina, there's another account. Opened 3 months ago. A department store card. Different name variation, but still you. Balance is over $8,000. Charges include boutique clothing, luxury cosmetics, and... He paused as though bracing me. A 5-night reservation at a resort in Scottsdale. For a moment, the room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, staring at the folders spread before me. She hadn't only borrowed, she had stolen an identity I had built over 70 years, reshaped it for her indulgence, and signed it as if my history were nothing but blank parchment for her pen. Dean continued, calm and precise. The signature is digital, and it's not yours. I'll add this to our evidence file. It strengthens everything. This isn't just neglect, Evelina. It's identity theft. That carries weight. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Send me the documents, I said. I'll print them and file them tonight. When the email arrived, I opened each attachment carefully, printing page after page. The numbers glared from the sheet's luxury charges written in ink that bore my name, but not my choice. I stacked them, slipped them into clear sleeves, and labeled them with the same calm hand I had once used drafting trusts for strangers. It was almost midnight when I closed the last binder. My back ached, and the house was quiet enough to hear the tick of the clock in the hallway. Yet I felt no despair, only a sharper stillness, as though I were standing at the edge of something long prepared. The evidence was mine now, every scrap cataloged every lie pinned to paper. Clarice had thought she was untouchable, that I would be too old, too distracted, too forgiving to notice. She had mistaken silence for blindness. But I saw everything. Damon showed up unannounced, his knock sharp and uneven, like he wasn't sure if he wanted me to answer. I opened the door and he stepped inside before I could invite him. Shoulders tight, eyes restless. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. I led him into the kitchen. The binders were already stacked on the table, waiting like quiet judges. He glanced at them, but chose not to sit. "Clarice is upset," he began, voice taut. "She says you blindsided her, locked her out of the house, sold her car. She feels like you're trying to destroy her." I folded my hands in my lap and studied him. He looked older than his 40 years in that moment, worry etched across his face, but also something else, defensiveness, that didn't belong to him. It belonged to the story she had fed him. "Damon," I said gently, "sit down." He hesitated, then pulled out a chair and lowered himself into it. His body angled away from me as though bracing for a blow. "Clarice isn't misunderstood," I said. I turned the first binder toward him and opened it. "She's documented." He frowned. "Mom." "Look," I said firmly. The first pages held utility bills, every one in my name highlighted in yellow. She never contributed, I explained. Gas, water, electricity, every dollar came from me. I flipped to the next section, the car insurance premiums circled in red. She drove my BMW for over a year, never paid a cent. She called it temporary. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. I opened the second binder. Streaming services, subscriptions, a second phone line labeled Home Office. All added under my account. He leaned forward, scanning the statements. Confusion clouded his face, then recognition, as though puzzle pieces were sliding into place against his will. "And this," I said, sliding the Nordstrom statement across to him. "Opened in my name. $3,000. Not mine." His eyes widened. I placed the final document in front of him, the Scottsdale resort charges. Another card. $8,000. Forged signature. "Do you recognize the dates she was with you, Damon? She used my identity to fund your vacation." He sank back in his chair, pressing his palms to his face. His shoulders heaved once, and his voice came muffled. "She told me she was handling everything. She said I didn't need to worry about bills anymore, that she had it covered." I let the silence linger, the weight of paper speaking louder than I could. When he lowered his hands, his eyes were wet, not from tears of grief, but from humiliation. "She controlled the finances, didn't she?" I asked softly. He nodded once, broken. "I just wanted peace, Mom. I didn't want to fight with her. And so you left me to fight alone." The words weren't cruel, but they cut all the same. He looked down at the evidence again, his mouth opening, then closing. I reached across the table, resting my hand near his, but not on it. "Son, you need a lawyer, not excuses, not her explanations. A lawyer." He lifted his gaze to mine, and for the first time in years I saw the boy he once was, lost and uncertain, searching for guidance he had ignored too long. The room was quiet, except for the steady tick of the hallway clock. He didn't argue. He didn't defend her again. He only nodded slowly, the smallest motion, but enough. When he left, he carried no papers with him. I kept them all. Because the next step wasn't his to take. It was mine. The notice went out by certified mail, Dean's office handling the delivery. A signature was required, and Clarice signed without hesitation. 40 minutes later, my phone buzzed with 6 missed calls from Damon's number. I didn't answer. The process had begun, and it would not be rerouted by panic or pleading. 2 days after the notice, Clarice's social media lit up with glossy photos of her at a desert retreat. Sun hat, wide-brimmed sunglasses, oversized the caption, dripping with performative calm resetting. Choosing peace over conflict. Some people will never understand. By nightfall, the post was gone. Deleted. But not before half the neighborhood saw it and passed the screenshots my way. I saved them into the growing folder labeled Post Recall Contact Clarice. Silence in public was still my weapon, but documentation remained my shield. When the mediation date drew closer, I called Celine my niece. She was 35, sharp-eyed, with a memory that recorded details like a camera. Clarice had always despised her for that, sensing she could not twist Celine's observations into new shapes. "Are you sure?" Celine asked when I explained. "Yes," I told her. "I don't need an advocate. I need a witness, someone who knows the history and won't be swayed by charm." She agreed without hesitation. Her presence would not change the legal weight of the evidence, but it would ground me in a room where Clarice would try to turn the air into theater. The morning of the mediation, I dressed with deliberate care. Not in armor, not in mourning, but in steadying colors. Gray wool, soft cream, blouse pearls Richard had given me on our 25th anniversary. When I entered the Law Center's neutral building, white walls, glass doors, anonymous carpeting, I felt none of the tremors I expected. Clarice arrived 10 minutes late, the click of her heels echoing through the hallway. She wore a fitted blazer in pale ivory, too expensive for someone claiming hardship. Her hair was styled perfectly, makeup layered for cameras rather than conversation. She swept into the waiting room with her phone in hand, ignoring Celine and me as if we were hotel staff. She didn't sit near us, only adjusted her blazer and crossed her legs like she was posing for a magazine spread. I could see the confidence in her posture, the belief that this was a misunderstanding, that she could smooth it away with a blend of condescension and charm. Celine leaned closer to me, her voice low. "She's rehearsing." I nodded, but my hands remained still on the binder in my lap. Inside were the pages that mattered: utility bills, forged applications, credit reports, the voice note preserved in digital ink. Paper didn't need rehearsal. At 9 sharp, the mediator entered, a man in his 50s with a clipboard and a neutral expression, honed from years of disputes louder and messier than ours. He laid out the rules. Respectful conduct. No interruptions. All evidence submitted in order. Clarice leaned back. Arms crossed, a faint smile on her lips. "Let's be clear," she said before we even began. "This is about a bitter old woman trying to ruin my future." Her words struck the air like stones tossed into still water, but I did not flinch. I simply set my binder on the table, opened it, and slid the first packet forward. "This is not about bitterness," I said. "This is about facts." Celine folded her hands, silent but steady, beside me. The room tightened, not with emotion, but with the inevitability of what was about to unfold. The mediator ushered us into room 3B, a plain space with a long table, 4 chairs, and walls the color of unpolished bone. It could have been anywhere: a library basement, a government office. But for me, it felt like the stage where truth would finally step out from behind the curtain. Dean was already seated, his papers neatly stacked, pen aligned with the edge of his folder. He gave me a nod, one professional to another, and I sat beside him. Celine took her chair a step behind, her gaze alert, recording everything without a single word. Clarice glided into the room, her ivory blazer catching the overhead light. She dropped her bag onto the table and leaned back, arms crossed, chin tilted in defiance. Her eyes flitted to the mediator, then to Dean, but never to me. The mediator cleared his throat. "We're here to review claims regarding the Beacon Crest property and a BMW vehicle, both held under a living trust. Mrs. Hart, you are the trustee. Ms. Vale, you are the respondent. Let's begin with documentation. Dean didn't hesitate. He slid the trust documents forward, notarized, dated, and signed. This structure was drafted by Mrs. Hart herself, amended after her husband's passing. Full recall authority was retained, allowing her to revoke occupancy and liquidate assets in cases of misuse or coercion. The mediator scanned the pages, his brow arching slightly. All signatures valid. Yes, Dean replied. Witnessed, notarized, and unchallenged until now. Clarice leaned forward, scoffing. I was pressured. I didn't understand what I was signing. She tricked me. Dean's voice remained steady. You were 35 when you signed, Ms. Vale. Not a minor, not incapacitated, and the clause you initialed made the recall power explicit. The mediator nodded and marked his notes. Next, Dean pressed a small recorder. The room filled with Clarice's own voice, cold and deliberate. You are a useless woman. I wish you'd never been my mother. The sound echoed against the sterile walls, more damning for its calmness than if it had been shouted. Clarice shifted in her seat, lips tightening, but she did not speak. The mediator's pen scratched across his clipboard. Dean moved to the next folder. Utility bills all paid by Mrs. Hart. Car insurance premiums in her name alone. Streaming services subscriptions, even a second phone line, all charged to her account without authorization. He laid each document in a neat line, every page a stone in a wall she could not climb. Then came the Nordstrom card. Dean held it up. $3,000 charged under Mrs. Hart's identity. Forged signature. He placed another statement beside it. And a department store card opened 3 months ago. Balance over $8,000, including a Scottsdale resort stay. Digital signature compared against Mrs. Hart's. Mismatch confirmed. Clarice snapped upright, her voice sharp. That wasn't me. I was under stress. She manipulated me, made me feel like I had no choice. The mediator raised a hand. Stress is not a legal defense for forgery. Please remain on point. Her jaw clenched. For the first time, I saw the edges of her confidence crumble. Dean closed the binder with a quiet finality. Mrs. Hart has exercised her recall authority legally. The property and vehicle are no longer under Ms. Vale's control. Further, we are submitting evidence of identity theft for criminal review. The mediator sat back reading his notes again before folding his hands. His voice was calm, unhurried. Based on the documentation, the trustee acted within her rights. The revocation of access and liquidation of assets stand. Ms. Vale, you hold no legal claim to the property, the vehicle, or any portion of this estate. Additionally, the forged credit applications may constitute criminal identity theft. That matter will proceed through the appropriate channels. Clarice opened her mouth, but no words came. Her fingers gripped the edge of her sleeve knuckles, whitening. The silence in the room was heavier than any argument she might have made. I sat still, binder closed before me, my breathing steady. This was not victory, it was confirmation, proof that the law could not be bent by charm, denial, or performance. The mediator ended the session with a nod. That concludes our review. I gathered my papers, rose without haste, and walked out with Celine at my side. Behind me, Clarice remained seated. Her armor cracked her silence loud. The Beacon Crest listing went live on a Thursday morning, and by Friday evening, the realtor called to say she already had multiple offers. By Saturday, the house was under contract, the coming soon banner replaced by pending. 48 hours was all it took for a home Clarice had treated as her stage to slip beyond her reach. The BMW was gone even faster. A dealership transport truck pulled into the drive, the men efficient and wordless. They didn't ask who had driven it, who had posed in it, who had claimed it online. They only checked the VIN, the title in my name, and drove it away. When the taillights disappeared at the end of the street, I stood by the window a long while, not mourning, not celebrating, but acknowledging an ending. Dean handled the fraud reports with his steady precision. Copies of forged applications, highlighted signatures, credit bureau confirmations, all filed with agencies that did not care about family politics. Only facts. He explained the process to me in plain terms. Accounts frozen, collections stopped, restitution to be pursued, wage garnishment set at 15%, the legal minimum. Clarice would learn soon enough that paper followed her more faithfully than followers ever had. Her social media, once a flood of curated images, slowed to a trickle, then silence. No more reels of dream kitchens or filtered shots of her with lattes by my hydrangeas. The last post lingered longer than the rest. Sometimes downsizing is growth. Choosing minimalism and peace over clutter. A staged shot of her holding the children in front of a borrowed apartment backdrop. The neighborhood didn't buy it. Not after months of hearing her boast about remodeling plans once the deed flips, or her offhand comments that I wouldn't be around forever. Gossip travels faster than any official notice. At the next church meeting, women leaned close and whispered, "So she lost the house, didn't she?" At the grocery store, a man from the HOA offered a clipped nod, eyes full of knowing. I didn't feed the stories. I didn't need to. Truth was already unspooling in quiet conversations over fences and checkout counters. Her version, downsizing minimalism sustainability, couldn't compete with the memory of her bragging voice. People remember arrogance long after they forget details. I heard that her so-called friends stopped appearing, the ones who once sipped wine by the pool she claimed as hers. Without the backdrop of Beacon Crest, without the BMW gleaming in the driveway, invitations dried up. She had built her image on borrowed brick and borrowed wheels. Now, with both gone, she had nothing left to display. Inside my smaller apartment above the garden center, silence settled differently. It no longer pressed against me as loss. It wrapped itself around me as clarity. Each binder on my shelf stood like a sentry, proof that I had not imagined her manipulation. Proof that I had acted, not reacted. I brewed tea each evening and sat by the window overlooking the parking lot. It wasn't the view of roses and hydrangeas I once had, but it was mine. No footsteps barged through without knocking. No packages littered the porch. The space breathed with me, not against me. Clarice, meanwhile, shrank into absence. Screenshots of her deleted posts lived in my folder. Notices from the court arrived in steady envelopes. Every step forward tightened the net, and every silence from her side proved its grip. I did not smile at her downfall. I did not gloat. I simply carried on each page, filed each decision made, each weight lifted. And as I turned another page in my binder one quiet evening, Dean called with new information. The letter from the IRS arrived in a stiff, white envelope, the kind that makes your pulse quicken even before it's opened. I sat at my kitchen table, the steam from my tea rising as I slid a letter opener across the seal. The words were blunt. According to their records, I had been listed as a dependent on Clarice and Damon's tax return for the past 2 years. Dependent. At 70 with my own pension, my own accounts, my own trust. She had claimed me as if I were another child under her roof. The audacity was galling, but the motive was worse. She had done it for money. A fabricated tax credit. Dean's voice over the phone was clipped, but calm. This falls under elder financial abuse statutes as well. It's a federal matter. They don't take it lightly. That same week, Damon called me, his voice rough, with something heavier than fatigue. "Mom," he said, "I need to see you." When he arrived, he looked as though he hadn't slept in days. He carried no briefcase, no smile. He sat heavily in the chair across from me, elbows on the table, head in his hands. I found something, he said. Finally. Clarice took out a loan. Against your future estate. She told the bank you'd already planned to leave her part of the assets. They gave her approval based on forged paperwork. I stared at him, the words pressing against me like a tide. How much? 40,000, he whispered. Already spent. Travel clothes, deposits on things I didn't even know she'd ordered. It's gone. Silence filled the room, broken only by the tick of the wall clock. Damon lifted his head, and for the first time, I saw no defense in his eyes, only shame. I confronted her, he said. She said it was an investment, that she was building our future. But Mom, there is no future. Not with her. His hands shook as he reached for his glass of water. I packed a bag. I'm at a motel near the interstate. I wanted to reach across the table to comfort him, as I once did when he scraped his knee or brought home a failed test. But comfort felt like complicity now. Instead, I laid my hand flat on the stack of documents that had become my lifeline. You see now, I said, quietly. He nodded, the weight of years pressing on his shoulders. I do. I just wish I hadn't waited so long. His marriage was unraveling in front of him, thread by glittering thread. The woman he thought had built a life of luxury had been mortgaging shadows, weaving lies into the very fabric of their finances. Damon was not only grieving his partnership, he was grieving the version of himself that believed her. When he left my apartment that night, he carried a small duffel bag and a silence so heavy it seemed to trail behind him. I watched from the window as his car pulled away, the taillights dimming into the dark. The illusions were breaking, and all that remained now was the reckoning. The apartment above the garden shop wasn't large, but it breathed in a way the Beacon Crest house never had once Clarice moved in. The floors creaked underfoot. The kitchen overlooked a parking lot instead of roses, and the walls were painted a bland rental beige. Yet the silence was clean, not heavy. I could hear myself think. I could hear myself be. On my first evening there, I unpacked only what mattered: my binders, a set of teacups, and a small box of rose cuttings I had taken from Beacon Crest before the sale. They looked fragile in their temporary pot's roots, uncertain stems thin. But I knew their strength. Roses carry memory in their veins. Given time, they bloom again. I placed them on the sunny ledge above the kitchen sink and whispered to them as if they were old friends. You're safe now. No one will move you without asking. Each morning after that, I watered them carefully, adjusting the light, trimming the leaves. It became ritual. Where Clarice once treated my hydrangeas as props for her photos, I tended these roses with a private devotion. They were not for display. They were for restoration. The apartment smelled faintly of soil from the shop below. Sometimes when deliveries arrived, I would stand at the window and watch the shopkeeper unload trays of seedlings and flats of herbs. Life continued, rooted and growing without any performance required. I liked that. It was in that quiet space that I decided on my rule. The grandchildren, Izzy and Lucian, were welcome any time. They could knock at dawn or dusk, no appointment necessary, and my door would open for them. But the adults, even Damon, even Clarice, if she dared, would need to call first. Respect became the ticket, and only those willing to show it would cross my threshold. I wrote the rule on a note card and taped it inside the cupboard where I kept the tea. A private contract with myself. No more unannounced arrivals, no more letting others rearrange my life as if it were theirs. The first weekend the children visited, They ran up the narrow staircase with backpacks, bouncing breathless from excitement. They didn't notice the missing grandeur, the smaller rooms, the hum of the fridge in place of a grand dining table. They only noticed me waiting with cocoa already warming on the stove. Izzy pressed her nose to the rose cuttings, giggling. "These will grow here too, Grandma." "Yes," I told her. "They'll grow stronger than ever." Lucian climbed onto the stool beside her, his fox tucked under his arm. "Can we plant some outside too?" "Someday," I said. "When they're ready." That night, after I tucked them into the fold-out couch, I sat by the window with my tea, looking at the glow of the garden shop below. The roses rested on the sill, their shadows faint against the wall. The house was gone. The car was gone. But here, in this smaller place, I had drawn the line that could not be erased, and I knew soon enough someone would test it. The message arrived through Damon. He knocked gently on my apartment door, his eyes tired, but clearer than they had been in months. "Mom," he said, "Clarice wants to meet. She says she's sorry. She wants to make things right." I didn't answer immediately. I studied him, the way his shoulders hunched as if bracing for my refusal. Then I nodded. Once. One meeting. At Dean's office. Not here. 2 days later, I sat across from her in that familiar room. The blinds were drawn, the table bare except for a folder in her manicured hands. Clarice wore another blazer, this one dark blue, but the confidence she used to radiate had thinned. Her smile was deliberate, practiced, not born of ease. "Evelina," she began, her voice smoother than I'd heard in months. "I know I've made mistakes. I was under pressure trying to hold everything together for Damon and the kids. I went too far. I see that now." I kept my hands folded on the table. Dean sat to my left, silent, his pen poised. Celine was absent this time. I hadn't needed a witness for what I knew would be theater. Clarice slid the folder toward me. "Here's what I propose. A repayment plan. I'll return what I can, monthly installments. And in exchange, you acknowledge that the assets' house car accounts were meant to be shared. That way we avoid court, avoid more pain for the family." Her tone carried the air of magnanimity, as if she were offering me mercy. Dean reached for the folder before I did. He scanned the top page, his expression unreadable until his brow arched. "Mrs. Vale, this isn't a repayment plan. This is a re-entry agreement. If signed, it would grant you partial claim to the estate again, contingent on your good faith payments." Clarice's smile faltered. "It's just legal language, a formality." Dean set the folder down firmly. "No, it's a trap." He turned to me. "If you signed this, she could argue co-ownership of any future assets, even those outside the trust. This isn't restitution, it's reclamation." I met Clarice's eyes then, and for the first time, I saw the desperation under her gloss. "You're still playing games," I said quietly. "Even now, after everything you think, I'll surrender a portion just to keep peace." Her voice rose brittle around the edges. "I'm trying to fix this. What more do you want from me?" "The truth," I replied. "And accountability." I pushed the folder back toward her. "Restitution is simple. You owe what you took. You repay what you can under supervision of the court, if necessary. But you will never again have ownership, access, or claim to what Richard and I built." Her hands trembled as she closed the folder. The mask of contrition slipped, and for a moment, the sharpness I knew too well glinted in her eyes. But she said nothing more. She gathered her papers, rose from her chair, and left the office with the faint click of heels that echoed long after she was gone. Dean exhaled. "She'll try again. Maybe smaller, maybe through Damon, maybe online. But today, you held the line." I nodded. My voice was steady when I answered. The line isn't moving. That evening, back in my apartment, I watered the rose cuttings on the windowsill. Their roots had begun to take faint green growth, pushing upward. They were fragile, but firming with each day. And so was I. The roses had taken root. Each morning, I leaned over the sill and poured water into the small terracotta pots, watching the soil darken and the stems straighten toward the light. Their leaves glistened faintly, and tiny buds hinted at blossoms to come. They were a reminder that beginnings can grow out of cuttings even after everything else has been trimmed away. That afternoon, Izzy came bounding up the stairs, her hair in a crooked braid and her backpack thumping against her shoulders. She held out a sheet of paper with both hands grinning wide. "It's you, Grandma," she announced. The drawing was bold lines pressed hard with colored pencil. A figure stood at a window with roses blooming bright red beside her. Across the top, in careful, uneven letters, she had written, "Strong Grandma." I felt something warm rise in my chest, gentler than pride, deeper than relief. I hugged her close, the paper crinkling between us. "Thank you, Izzy. This is the best gift I could have." Lucian followed more quietly, clutching his fox, his eyes darting around the small apartment. "It smells like flowers here," he said. "Not like cars." I laughed softly. "That's because flowers don't run on gasoline." They settled on the rug content with cocoa and crackers, their chatter filling the rooms that had grown too quiet. For a while, I simply listened, letting their voices weave a rhythm steadier than any clock. Later, Damon arrived. He didn't stay long. He never did these days, but there was a shift in him I hadn't seen before. He leaned against the doorway, his hands in his pockets, his face tired but less clouded. "I started counseling," he told me. "It's harder than I thought, but I need it. I can't keep pretending." I nodded, my heart both heavy and light. "That's good, Damon. It's the right step." He glanced toward the children, then back at me. "I don't know what happens next, but I want to get better. For them. For myself." I reached out and squeezed his hand. One step at a time. After they left, the apartment grew quiet again. The cocoa cups sat in the sink, Izzy's drawing propped against the window. Outside, the evening settled over the garden shop, the smell of soil drifting upward on the breeze. I leaned close to the roses, their fragile stems silhouetted in the fading light. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, but steadier too. I whispered to the plants, to the silence, to myself. Love may open doors, but only respect keeps them open. And with that truth rooted in me, I turned off the light, leaving the roses to the moon. Outline.